Welcome back. Historians have always posed the question, who were the first Americans? Were they Mongolians, Native Americans? How does Christopher Columbus and the Spanish explorers fit into the timeline? Well, in a time when defining what it means to be American is a bit difficult, Dr. David Imhotep offers an answer that you won't find in any grade school history books. His recently published book, The First Americans Were Africans, claims that none other than Africans were the first to set foot on American soil. Dr. Imhotep joins us today in the studio to discuss his findings. Welcome to Cityline.
Thank you.
Let's start with the fact that you have the world's first PhD in ancient African history. Tell us a bit about your decision to pursue your doctorate in this particular field.
Well, as I was coming up through the ranks, I wanted to deal with Black history, but not the type of Black history that we talk about today, which is African American history. I wanted to go back to ancient history, so that degree did not exist. So I got together with the Union Institute University, that is the one of the first universities that is accredited, that will let you find experts in the fields and that in the sideline fields, and then you can put together a team to create a new PhD, which is what I did.
Now, where did you do this research? How did you do this research?
Okay, where did I do this? Some of the research on site. I've been to Egypt a couple times, Nubia, Mexico, Hawaii, and there is also in New Hampshire, I believe, Salem, New Hampshire, there is a place where they call the American Stonehenge, which most people don't know about.
And I understand you have many published papers supporting all of the writings that are in your book.
Yes, 7 peer-reviewed articles, soon to be 8, will back up the statements that I am making about the first Americans were African.
Now, it's a very bold statement about the first inhabitants of America being African. Tell us about that.
Well, 56,000 years ago, it seems that people from Africa sailed to South America, Piedra Farida. 56,000 years ago, we have artifacts and ancient hearths that come from fires and whatnot. And we see that they came there at 51,000.
How did they come from Africa to what we consider North America?
To North America, 51,700, all of those places that came by ship. And I'm not talking about wood ships, I'm talking about the reed ships. Reed ships, as Thor Heyerdahl showed that you could sail a reed ship from Africa to South America in his Ra 2 experiment.
So they came to the Americas, not necessarily what we consider North America.
They were first in South America 56,000 years ago, and then we have a place, Dr. Al Goodyear, University of South Carolina, found a area in South Carolina that dates back to 51,700 BC.
And what evidence was found to support the arrival of the Africans in these places?
Okay, I mentioned the ones in the first place. The second place, I will say that they found flint spear tips and arrowheads or arrow tips.
Now, this would be, of course, a great surprise to historians who have taught us that Columbus and the Spaniards, or even Native Americans, were the first inhabitants of these lands.
Yes, that is a story that needs to be updated.
Well, why do you think the story was not told? Why wasn't the evidence found prior to the information that you have in this book?
I would say a combination of politics in the beginning, and in the later years, I could not tell you. That's something for a political analyst to analyze. All I do is research and report the findings.
Tell us some of the more surprising findings that we will read about in your book.
Other than the 56,000 years ago, there is a gigantic pier and breakwater 1 mile due west of the Bahamas that you can see today in 20 feet of water. when the Bahamas sank, the Great Bahama Bank, around 7000 BC, as is in Mr. Boss's dissertation, a fellow named Boss. There was a gigantic island, and there is a pier and a breakwater that you can see, as I said today, in the breakwater. We're talking about 600 yards long, gigantic blocks, as in the pyramid, and between the blocks there is no cement, as in the pyramid, and also as in the pyramid, you can barely fit a razor blade in between. So the analogy there is very, very similar, that these people were conducting international trade. There is, when Cortez, the Spanish conquistador, visited, I say very lightly, the Aztecs, he saw that the King Montezuma wore a lion skin with a lion head when he met him. And then on the other end in Egypt, you see Ramses II. They did a autopsy, if you will, on his remains, and they found inside his stomach American tobacco and cocaine residue from Bolivia. So we're talking about international trade here.
And there were no lions in South America.
Absolutely
so
not.
They would have had
jaguars,
to come from...
but no African lions. They would have to have come from Egypt. Sorry, Africa.
How do the Aztecs and the Mayans interact with the Africans, and what impact did these Africans, other than the international trade you just mentioned, what impact have they had on the shaping of the Americas?
The Africans, the beginning before the Mayans and Aztecs, or just in general?
Just in general.
In general, well, you see, they were there 53,000 years before any other peoples come. The Mongolians, as we are taught, the Asians, who did come across the Bering Straits, did not come over until 3000 BC. That is the closest, the first evidence we have of Mongolians or Asians coming across, because in Dr. Limmick's dissertation, she found that the pass was closed 115,000 years to 8000 BC. So no one can come over before then, and they did not exist until around 3000 BC. So the combination of the Africans, who were there 56,000 years ago, and the Asians, who came over 3000 BC, their children are the Native Americans that we all hear about. Their children.
I see.
Not until then, not until after 3000 BC, when those two groups interact, are there Native Americans.
Well, Dr. Imhotep, this is just fascinating. Thanks for coming from Baltimore to share this information with us. Everybody, the book is called The First Americans Were Africans. It's by Dr. David Imhotep. We'll be right back with more of Cityline. Stay tuned.
To examine closely at leisure all the pieces in that collection. It is a priceless collection, and many of you have raised the question which must be pursued: what will happen when von Wutenau, who is now 84, dies? What will happen to a collection which is of tremendous significance for us blacks throughout the Third World? Because the likelihood is, as has happened in previous centuries, the likelihood is that all of these marvelous pieces which we have seen, which we have not yet had time to photograph completely and to preserve, may disappear. Von Wutenau has, in addition to these little sculptures, he has a catalog of everything he has. Brilliant photographs taken by several professionals over the years.
She is apparently the director of the dancing. And this is a man, and his features are Totonac. They are not Negroid, but they paint them with chapapote, so it is a warrior who is black. That is also an atavismo, because they knew that the Almecs were black.
You're saying that the Almec people themselves were black?
No, well, this one certainly was black. You see, you can't see. And here is the proof for it. It's one of the best proofs I have. This is a figure made that is between the Olmecan period and the Totonacan period, transition period. And this is an Olmec sculpture. And to be black, they covered it with tar. You see, it's a stone head, but it's covered with this tar. So not only the features and the thick lips come out primitive, but it is made black. This this piece was put on the cover of Revista in Mexico in March, and shows you that another colossal Almec head was found in Mexico, which has not been, in my opinion, I don't know where it is. It's never exhibited. I wonder if they really have excavated it. Of course, you see these, there is the item that the people in Tabasco, Tabasco is one of the provinces here, I mean one of the states, the state, just as Louisiana is a state. And the people in Tabasco don't want it to disappear from their place to Mexico City. And there are frictions between the Instituto de Antropología and the state, you see. And that's why I don't know if they've done in the state something about it. In any case, it has not been shown up here in Mexico City. But it is 100% Negroid features, and I wish.
The chapel is dedicated to Santa Maria de los Buenos Aires. Saint Mary of the Good Winds was the patron saint of navigators and a favorite of Columbus. This altar painting dates from shortly after Columbus died and features what's considered the first and most accurate portrait of the great explorer on the left. It's also thought to be the first painting of Indians done in Europe. The Virgin's cape seems to protect everyone under it, even the Indians.
When I was reading to prepare for this interview, I was quite surprised to see you use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans. You use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans. You use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans. You use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans.
You know, race relations issues, things like that. I mean, I have a freedom that a lot of people don't have because of that.
Because you used the word Aborigine.
Because I've been through the fire.
I didn't think it was over, but I didn't think it would come to this.
We're not able to get up and just go. We don't have transportation. I mean, we live in paycheck to paycheck. I mean, it ain't like we could just able to get up and just leave.
We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us.
100 years later, the Negro has still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land.
Right? On page 24, he say in any case, at least 3,000 Americans, Native Americans, who are all reclassified as Negroes, are known to have been shipped to Europe between 1493 and 1501, which is during the Columbus expeditions, as we stated earlier. So that became a little bit more clearer on how many actually was taken. About 3,000, and they were shipped from here. Now, you know, they told you that the shipment came from Africa to the Americas, right? But the earliest records of slavery happened from taken from the Moors here and was taken into Africa and different parts of Europe. Now, there's another good book called What They Never Told You in History Class by Indo-Kemet Kush. And he says the first Americans were black.
Yeah, got it.
And so y'all go and check that out. All right, matter of fact, he says Colonel A. Bradgen say that he saw in a collection in Ecuador a statuette of a Negro that is at least 20,000 years old. He added some statues of the Indian gods in Central America possess typical Negroid features, and certain prehistoric monuments there undoubtedly represents Negroes in the shadows of Atlantis. So is you where Atlantis was? And who was on Atlantis? The book is called The Shadow of Atlantis, where he made that statement that there was a Negroid statuette that was at least dated 20,000 years old. And he said that that the Indian gods in Central America, that their gods had typical Negroid features.
Yeah.
And he said it's undoubtedly that all the prehistoric monuments represent Negroes. Colonel A. Bradgen, Braghine, Bradgen. So this is a colonel who fought for them, who died when there was blood and sweat and tears, and adapt and overcome and conquer, and breaks out and say every damn thing was Negro, and shit, the shit been here at least 20,000 years, niggas. And it keeps going further and further back, don't it? The Empress Verdiasi Terra Washita Tunica Godstone El Bay, she writes and she states that the Washita are the original inhabitants of what is now named the North, Central, and South Americas. Therefore, the Washita are not Indians. We do not accept the name African American, colored, or Indian. We, the people of North America, are predominantly Washita, the ancient mound builders. We were here thousands of years before the amalgamated so-called Indian. The Washita Empire had many descendants, and she said the 12 Shoshone nations, Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, Seminole, Choctaw, which is the 5 civilized tribes. It's called Blackfoot, Tar Heel. You know, all of that is part of the Choctaw and part of the Cherokee. Arikara, Sioux, Kiowa, Mohawk, Cheyenne, Mandan, the Yamasee, the Arawak, the Lumbee, the Montauk, the Nanacote Moors, as we spoke about, which is the Lenape, the Ben Ishmaelites, the Melungeons. And you can go and check the Melungeons. They just got a new article out in which that just came out in which that states that the Melungeons, they try to give all these fancy conclusions. Oh, well, they Spaniards, so they're Portuguese. They all this. The article says, let's just get down to business. These was blacks and white women. These was black men and white women, and this their offspring. That's what a Melungeon is. This is the family line in which that several of these presidents come from, like Abraham Lincoln, like Calvin Coolidge, Eisenhower. All these individuals came from this Melungeon bloodline. But the Mohegans, the Comanche, the Nez Perce, the Natchez, the Pawnee, all right, the Tuscarora, the Washoe, the Catawba, the Micmac, the Osage, the Jenneckenson, the Mattaponi, the Powhatan, the Wagomanog, and many, many more tribal nations. All of them is Washington. They was all Moors. These are Moors. All right, these are Moors. Even though they've been called Native Americans, these are Moors. And have you know, go to a book. It's called The Songs of the Earth. All right, these are actually photos of Edward Curtis. This is coming from Spokane Gary. Spokane Gary. Check out what he says now. We are black. Spokane Gary, all the way in Washington State, back in 1811, who died in 1892. He was born in 1811, died in 1892 now. He was a chief of a Native American Indian, so-called Indian tribe. And he comes out and says, yo, we are black. And if we cut ourselves, the blood will be red. And so with the whites, it is the same. Though their skin may be white, I am of another nation. When I speak to you, you do not understand me. When you speak, I do not understand you. This is the translation, all right? So even though it says that they're black, you know it's the metaphor. You know what they were saying. They were dark hued.
Right. Yeah.
So right there, right, this is from the Songs of the Earth. This is an actual chief telling you that they were black before the so-called black, you know what I'm saying, thing of the 1960s. Like the Berry Fell, in which that he speaks about the Micmac of the northern Algonquin, the family of tribes in which that the Micmac belonged to. And he said that they spoke the language of Libyan, a Libyan. Now, where's Libya at? That is next to Egypt. That's in Africa. And the crazy thing is that they preserved it over 1,000 years. This is from a Harvard professor who studied language. It's talking about us in some shape, form, or fashion. And this is coming from a Harvard professor who stated that Micmac, a damn Algonquin tribe, speaks African, Libyan, which is actually, when you look at it, it looks like hieroglyphics. It looks like the Mayan language, it looks like the Egyptian language, or the hieroglyphics of the meanings are identical. Africans and the Discovery of America by David Leo Weiner. He writes, when Columbus wanted to address the kings of the West Indies, he sent interpreters who spoke Hebrew, Arabic, and Chaldean. West Indians speaking Hebrew, Arabic, and Chaldean, y'all, here in the West Indies. That means in the Caribbean.
I was quite surprised to see you use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans. You use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans. You use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans. You use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans.
You know, race relations issues, things like that. I mean, I have a freedom that a lot of people don't have because of that.
Because you use the word Aborigine.
I appeared before Congress on July the 7th, 1987. I'd been summoned there to give due cause. They should not refer to Columbus's accidental stumble into the Caribbean, which he thought was the backside of India, as a discovery. I remember when I entered the chamber, this gentleman, head of the Quincentenary Commission, came up to me and said, "You don't mean to say you come here to say Columbus did not discover America?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You must be mad." I said, "You look mad to me too." As a result of my presentation, Congress decided to delete the word discovery from official documents. But I appeared before the Congressional Committee and I presented 12 witnesses, all European. Because they're going to say I'm Afrocentric if I show them this African said this. No, no, no. I'm going to take the very people that you think you will listen to. Columbus is the first person. I said, that's how I began. I'm not the first person to suggest there were Africans in America before Columbus. Christopher Columbus is the first person to say that. He actually says in the Journal of the Second Voyage that when he was in Haiti, Native Americans came to them and told them that black-skinned people had come from the south and southeast trading in gold-tipped metal spears. Columbus may or may not have believed, but he actually collected samples of these spears. They were sent back to Spain. They were meticulously, microscopically examined in Spain. And they were found to be identical, not just similar, identical with spears being forged in African Guinea. 32 parts, 18 were of gold, 6 of silver, and 8 of copper. Not only were they identical metallurgically, the words the Africans were using for these spears were the words the Americans were using. African word for gold, Ghana. That's why it's called Ghana. Gold Empire, the Golden Empire. And I checked it out in several African languages. Sarakole, Soninke, Gadzago, Kane. Vayan Mende, Kani. Kisi, it's Kani. Kono, it's Kani. Fuel, it's Kane. That's the word for gold. And that's the word the Americans are using. And they have their own bloody gold word. Why are they using this strange word? And presenting material which, when checked out, when the metallurgists checked it out in Europe, they found the spears were identical in the ratio of gold, silver, and copper alloys. How could you have linguistic and metallurgical identities like that? It is utterly impossible. Not only that, I then went beyond that. I not just showed Columbus. Ferdinand wrote a book about his father, and he said, my father told me that he saw Negroes north of Honduras. Columbus knew what a so-called Negro looks like. He was in Africa. That's how my book began. Columbus sitting at a table in Africa, arguing with the Portuguese. I tracked this man down. It is possible when you become very famous, people could track every little thing. Who you slept with, who you tried to kill, who slept with your wife or your husband, everything. And one found a hell of a lot of stuff on this clown, or rather this villain. He did some horrible things, yet he's known as the great discoverer. Ferdinand said, my father told me he saw Negroes north of Honduras. He not only heard of them in Haiti, he actually saw them north of Honduras. Vasco Núñez de Balboa, on September the 25th in the year 1513, I've got it down to the day. He's coming down the slopes of Paracu in Darien, which we now call Panama. And he and his men saw 2 tall black men among the Native Americans. They are startled. They haven't brought no black people there. Several of them commented it. Peter Martyr said they must have been shipwrecked. Then he also said they were Ethiopians. Well, Ethiopians, the word Ethiopian is not used for people of Ethiopia. The reason why Ethiopia gets that name, Ethiopia means burnt skin. People of burnt skin would generally call them Ethiopians. So it's not referring to Ethiopia. Peter Martyr said they must have been shipwrecks. Lopez de Gomara said these blacks Balboa saw in the Indies were identical with the blacks we saw in Guinea. Rodrigo de Colmenares saw blacks. Captain of Balboa saw blacks east of the Gulf of San Miguel. Alphonse de Catafalque reported in his book, Study of Panama. L'Abbé Brasseur de Bourbourg was the guy who went to Panama, said there were two distinct people in Panama. The Mandinga, black skin, and the Tule, red skin. The red skin would be the Native American. And Alphonse de Catafalque presents us with a map showing blacks in various places in early America. The Charus of Brazil, the Yamasee of Florida, and the black Caribs of St. Vincent, pre-Columbian. Alonso Ponce cites them off Campeche in Mexico. River Palacio cites them off Tegucigalpa in the Nicaraguan Honduran border. Ramon Pane, a priest, speaks of them as the black gold traders. Fray Gregorio Garcia cites them off Cartagena, Colombia. A dozen Europeans, Christopher Columbus, Ferdinand Columbus, Vasco Núñez de Balboa, Peter Martyr, López de Gomara, Rodrigo de Colmenares, Alphonse de Catafalque, L'Abbé Brasseur de Bourbourg, Alonso Ponce, River Palacio, Ramon Pane, Fray Gregorio Garcia, seeing things that are not there. Probably blacks are haunting their dreams. It's absurd. You cannot have 12 eyewitnesses to an event that never happened. And I have not just 12 eyewitnesses. That is just one piece of evidence. I have 12 pieces. So it's not just the eyewitnesses, the metallurgical evidence. That it was tested. They were found to be identical in the ratio of gold, silver, and copper alloys as spares being forged in African Guinea. 18 parts gold, 6 silver, 8 copper. How could you have identities like that? Then there's the linguistic identities, which I just mentioned. Saracolis and Inki, Gadzago, Vai, Mende, Kisiko, Nopul went through half a dozen African languages to check out the word. And they're using the same bloody word that Americans are using. How is that possible? If it was a European, they only need one piece of evidence. I'm giving you 7. How could you deny that? And it doesn't stop there. There is the botanical evidence. Take the banana. We use the word banana for the banana, but that's not the African word for the banana. The word for the banana is bakoko in Africa. Banana is an Arab word. The Africans didn't have bananas. The bananas were introduced into Africa by the Arabs very early, and they have a different word for it. They do not have banana. They have bakoko. I have checked the bakoko word because they found bananas in Peru. Peru didn't have bananas. Pre-Columbian Peru was not supposed to have, they didn't have original bananas. The banana, the reason why we found the banana is because when they buried their dead, they would have ceremonies every year, the year of the day of the death, and they would put fruit in the grave, and among the fruit they put in the grave was the banana. And they do not originally have bananas. That has been checked out. It's only found in these graves. If they were eating the banana, we'd find other kind of evidence. And the word for the banana in Peru is the same as the word the Africans have. We call it banana, but the Africans call it bakoko. So I started checking out the words in Peru. How did this banana appear? They don't have bananas at that time in South America. And found in Galibi it's bakuku, in Oyapock it's baku, in Oyampi it's these are all South American languages. In Oyampi it's bakome, and Tupi is bakoba because and are interchangeable plosives. And in Apiacus it's bakuwa, in Puri it's bahu. So you have bakoko, bakuku, bako, bakome, bakoba, bakoba, baho. Can't happen unless you have a connection, a very early connection. And then comes the oceanographic evidence, because most people say, here is Africa and here is America. How could the Africans cross? They only have canoes that Tarzan can turn over in the movies. But that's another myth again. First of all, there are two things here that they did not take into account. I lived on the river. I had this knowledge of currents because I used to swim 3.5 miles across the water to the air base. That was a big thing to show how you are. You know, boys are like that. They're always playing the ass, trying to prove they're strong. Several of us drowned. So you could see what I mean by playing the fool. Anyway, I used to swim across the river, so I was extremely strong. And I knew about currents, because most people think the river is just like that. No, the river is alive. In certain parts of the falls in Guyana, the water is running as fast as a motor car. You don't have to have an engine, you have to know how to steer. Or it hits you against the rock and you're blown to pieces. The water moves as fast as a motor car. And in those waters, they do not move as fast as a motor car, the great rivers, but they move with force and take you places. And we have discovered 3 currents of Africa that take you automatically to America. There's one up the Cape Verde, one up the Senegambia coast, one up the southern coast of Africa. Once you are caught in those currents, you have to come to America unless the fish get you first. Whether you have an engine or not, the water is the engine. It's very powerful. And it's exactly where those currents end that we find the African presence. It goes to Mexico. It goes into other parts of America. It goes to Brazil. They've recently found, listen to this, look at the lies involved here. They recently found an African Negro woman. I say Negro because not all blacks are Negro. The African has 6 faces. For example, if you're in a dry African climate, you have a narrow nose. If you're in a wet or moist African climate, you have a broad nose. Most people don't know that. They don't know they have 6 types of African. There's the Nilotic type. They're all black. But they have the Nilotic type, the so-called true Negro type, all sorts of types they have. And I have in my new book the faces of the various types. And all of these types appear. But what is most extraordinary is the evidence we have of their ships. They had the ships. Thor Heyerdahl became world famous because he got the Baduma people on Lake Chad to build a boat that the Africans built before Christ. Thor Heyerdahl used the boat the Africans built before Christ. They showed him the model. They built the boat. He financed it. A boat they were using before Christ, and it crossed the Atlantic successfully. Heyerdahl told me, Van Sertima, we did not even have to fish. The fish jumped on board. Because in those currents are millions of fish. Millions. And it wasn't just Heyerdahl. Alain Bombard also tested African boats. And they made it in less time than Vespucci. You have several, if you study the work I have done in the new book, Early America Revisited, you'll see these guys made it in less time than the European boats because of their knowledge of the currents. And they're not only currents of the Cape Verde, of the Senegambia coast, of the southern coast of Africa that take you to America, they're currents that spin you back towards Africa. We have an evidence of a boat, American boat, Native Americans landing in Africa 62 BC. There were 7 in the boat because it was an accident. They were taken because the currents that not only take you there and pull you back. We don't have any evidence of Europeans doing that. We have it in Native American 62 BC. That is in my book, They Came Before Columbus. And apart from this oceanographic evidence, there's the navigational evidence. That's the boats. The Africans had the boats. The Africans built the boat for Heyerdahl. Heyerdahl became world famous about how he crossed the Atlantic. He didn't build the boat. It was Africans who built the boat for him. A boat they had used before Christ, the Baduma people on Lake Chad. It's in my new book, Early America. You'll see the boat. The Africans built it. They could easily have crossed. And when you cross, the current actually takes you into the Caribbean, to Brazil, or parts of South America, to Mexico, etc. Recently, listen to this. Look at the cheating going on. Look at the profound dishonesty of scientists. They found a Negro woman in Brazil. In Brazil, where the currents come from Africa, Caribbean, Brazil, etc. They found a Negro woman in Brazil, 12,500 years old. That is even before the Native Americans. Now, Negroes always came from Africa, but it was so embarrassing that they suggested, yes, it's a Negro, but it came from Asia. Now, this is Brazil, you know. Brazil is on the Atlantic coast. To come from Asia, you have to get a boat that's going to take you all the way to South America, and then you have no car. Currents may take you, help you to get to South America, but then you have to walk to Brazil. Then you get the tip, you have to walk all the way to Brazil to drop your skull. And the New York Times ran the story like that, you know, thinking, and they even changed the name. When they found this Negroid woman, they call her Louisa, because the first human we found on Earth is Lucy, an African. So they call her Louisa. But when it got to the New York Times, they call her Valherbe or Malherbe or something like that. And she comes from Asia. Niggers don't come from Africa anymore. They come from Asia. You find them in the wrong time, in the wrong place. Jesus Christ, I mean, how far can you take this nonsense? It is absurd. And you find also skeletal evidence. Listen to this, because I have to be very careful here. I was in 2 intelligence services in the world, the Guyana Intelligence Service and the British Intelligence Service, and you're not supposed to tell secrets. So I have to say this in a way that shows that I don't know nothing. Okay. They found 2 African skeletons in the United States Virgin Island at Hull Bay, St. Thomas. These skeletons were found in a strata or layer of earth which is datable 1258 2.5 centuries before Columbus. But they could not date the bones. Something strange had entered the bones of these skeletons. Now, I know why something strange had happened, why something strange had entered, because of something that was done in that area, and I'm not allowed to talk about it. All I could say is not far from Cuba, and Cuba was giving us some trouble, and we had to tell Castro, come on, we're the world power, so don't play the fool with us. We'll teach you a lesson. That's all I'm allowed to say. But I went down to the Virgin Islands when I heard about these skeletons. And they promised, I shamed Leslius, archaeologist of the island. I spoke to the whole university, big crowd, I shamed him. He said he'd allow me to see the skeletons. Come there by 12 o'clock the next day. I arrived 10 to 12, raced across the island. Arrived at 10 to 12. The door was locked. Well, I am a very nice person. But when I get angry, I'm not very nice. So I ran at the door. Wham! Shook the place. The police came out. What are you doing here, sir? I was invited here. You know the police, don't you see the place is closed? Yes, sir, but it's very strange that it should be closed. I was invited here, I was to come here by the move along, sir, and we have to arrest you. And I moved along. But fortunately for me, friends on the island who'd heard of my interest and I'd spoken to the university there, they took me to a rock pool at St. John. That was St. Thomas where they found the skeletons. They took me to a rock pool at St. John's at the Virgin Islands. And they wanted to show me carvings of tropical animals. When I saw these carvings, I said, no, that is not evidence. Those tropical animals are in both places, both Africa and America. But as I was preparing to leave, the light of the sun shone on the rock, just above the rock pool. And I looked down and I saw a strange formation, dots and crescents. And I said, nature cannot do that. Nature cannot do that. And because it will wash against the rock and it may cause a kind of cleavage in the rock, but it can't make perfect curves and dots and curves. It cannot do that. So I went down there and I cleaned the rock. And photographed it. I sent it to various parts of the world. I sent it to Africa. So someone in Africa, in Ghana, said it's a Gainami sign. And I said, send me evidence of Gainami sign. And he sent it to me. And I said, no, no, no. Don't waste my time, man. That doesn't look anything like the Gainami sign. But I kept taking it wrong. And eventually, Dr. Barry Fell of Harvard, he's dead now. He'd written America, BC. The New York Times ran 3 pages attacking me and Fell. I brought out they came before Columbus. Barry Fell brought out America, BC. He was dealing with other kinds of contacts. I was dealing with African contact. The New York Times ran 3 pages attacking me and Fell. They wouldn't even allow anybody in America. But fortunately for me, Dr. Clarence Wine, the oldest of American archaeologists, who'd been on the place where they found the stone heads with African faces, he wrote a marvelous essay on me because he was the oldest American archaeologist. They couldn't kick out his essay. So he said, I am absolutely convinced of the soundness of Van Sorten's conclusions. So in spite of all that, it came through. But look now, the skeletons, we cannot move on. Because recently we have another clown who's entered the Virgin Islands. And he's saying now that even though they're in strata 1250 AD, these skeletons could not be, could not be Africans because they have, could not be proper Africans because they have something teeth, they have some problem with the teeth. And Africans cannot have that problem because they are some sort of nonsense, but they don't eat certain things. I mean, look, what incredible evidence. If I did not find that script which was translated, plunge in to cleanse yourself. This is water for ritual ablution before prayer, because Barry Fell says, it's Libyan, so I sent it to the Libyan Department of Antiquities, and they came up with the translation. Plunge in to cleanse yourself, this is water for ritual ablution before prayer. And then comes a map. It's in my new book, a map of Brazil that shows independent black settlements in Brazil, pre-Columbian. And then comes the oral evidence in Mali. They speak of a king, Abu Bakari II, who wanted to cross the ocean because he felt there was land beyond. And he appears, the Mexicans report this strange black man in white robes appearing. And it is also reported by the Arabs because Mansa Musa went to Cairo. He's a Muslim, and he went to Cairo. When he was in Cairo, he talked about, they asked him, what happened to your brother? And he told him that he wanted to cross the ocean and he never came back. And it's recorded by the Arabs in Al-Kashandi and the Masilik al-Absar, Fi Mamilik al-Amsar, so that's the documented evidence. Then there's the iconographic evidence. So I've presented 12 pieces of evidence: eyewitness accounts, metallurgical evidence, linguistic evidence, botanical evidence, oceanographic evidence, navigational evidence, skeletal evidence, epigraphic evidence, the script, cartographic evidence, a map, oral evidence of the Mali Griers, documented evidence, the Arabs, Al-Kakashani, the Masilik al-Absar, Fi Mamilik al-Amsar, and the iconographic evidence. That is, you look at my book and you're going to see sculptures of Africans. There's everything. The texture of the hair, the shape of the faces, lips, noses, everything. And one of the things they found, and I'm not going to talk about it at this point in the lecture later, they found something that is so astonishing that they are utterly embarrassed. And that was found after. But here is the 1310, 1311 journeys where I present 12 pieces of evidence. I did not know of an even earlier visit because that is what I presented to Congress, and they decided to delete the word discovery. So let me make it quite clear. Truth, trust the ground will rise again. Egyptians made a journey across the Atlantic. How did they do that? Why did they do that? How do we know that they did it? Listen carefully. Do not confuse modern Egypt with ancient Egypt. These are two totally different worlds. Here we are in America, and it would be very difficult to find an American in this room. We call ourselves Americans because we are in America. We are American citizens. But there are African people here, European people perhaps, Asian people, but no Americans. I am part American, I am part Makusi Indian and part African, but it would be difficult to find an American audience that is pure American. That's why Egypt, do you go to Egypt and you said the Arab is not an Egyptian? The people who built the pyramids were not Arabs. I know, man, because I am responsible for returning to the bloody Arabs the splinters of the Sphinx's nose and chin, and the Arabs do not want to remake it because it looks Negro. But we can go into the graves. We can go into the graves and we find the hard evidence. The skeletal evidence is overwhelming. But you see, Egypt was so rich. The Africans were so extraordinary. And they were not superior people. You don't have inferior and superior people. This is what makes you superior and inferior. A certain vision of the world. A certain vision of yourself. Many of us have been destroyed. Reduced. Because we've been made to accept other people's vision of us. Here I am responsible. I financed a telephone link-up between Gamal Abdel Mokhtar, the Arab delegate at UNESCO, Sheikh Anthony Diop, the African delegate at UNESCO, myself, the representative of the British Museum, Garland Roberts, who found the pieces, and another gentleman who did translations from the French and British. No, Van Sertima, we can't do that. Because if we start returning this item and that item to this and that museum, we'll have no museum. I said, sir, we're not asking you to return everything from your museums. You're well aware of the things that have been taken from other museums and other places. This is a very specific thing. It is of no value to you. You can't show it. What is the point? You can't show the splinters of the nose. Nobody's interested in splinters. Put the nose back on. But the Arabs do. The Mokhtar, the Arab delegate, never said a bloody word. Boy, he don't want no nigger nose interfering with the tourist trade in Egypt. It's as crude as that. Look why Egypt is no longer Egyptian. Those are not the people who built the pyramids. The Syrians attacked in 654 BC. The Persians attacked in 550 BC. The Greeks attacked in 320 BC. The Romans attacked just before and after Christ. The Arabs attacked 638 to 640 AD. That is why Egypt is no longer Egyptian. They have nothing to do with the building of the pyramids. If you go back in the graves, we have found hard evidence in the graves that Egyptians were African. Let me listen to the anthropologists, all the great anthropologists. Because this is hidden, this doesn't come out in history books. The earliest human fossil found in Egypt was the skeleton of the Nazlet Kata man found near Tata, Egypt, which was dated 35,000 to 30,000 years before Christ. Regarding the racial affinity of this skeleton, Thoma concludes strong alveolar prognatism combined with fossil Prinacilis and an African skull is suggestive of Negroid morphology. He proves it's a Negro. Then comes Wendorf, 1982. Wendorf discovered the skeleton at Wadi Kubaniya, located 10 to 15 kilometers north of Aswan in Egypt. This skeleton dated approximately 20,000 years before Christ. The wide nasal aperture, lower nasal margin morphology, presence of the sulcus prinacilis, wide interorbital distance and alveolar prognatism demonstrate affinities with broad African variants. All of the great anthropologists, archaeologists, Thoma, Fehrenbach, Wendorf, Stewart, Green, Armilagus, Wrightmore, Crawford, all of them prove that those early Egyptians in the Pyramid Age were African. That's the reason why Mokhtar, the Arab delegate, doesn't want a Negro nose on the Sphinx, because they don't want to relate back. But the Germans sent me, I have it in my new book, you see a beautiful color photograph showing you what the world was 1,200 years before Christ. The black is on top of the world. He is in charge of Egypt. There's no question about it. And they built the pyramids. The Japanese came to my friend Sheikh Anta Diop, seeking advice on building a pyramid. And Sheikh Anta Diop said, do not use bronze tools. And the Japanese said, how could you say that? The last stage of the Egyptian was the Bronze Age. And he says the last age is not the best age. There you cannot. The Japanese would not listen. They went there, they made such a mess, they had to throw them out. The Great Pyramid contains more stone than all the churches, chapels, and cathedrals built in England since the time of Christ. If all the stone in this pyramid were sawed into blocks 1 foot on an edge, and these were laid end to end, they would stretch 2/3 of the way around the globe at the equator. The Great Pyramid contains enough stone to construct 30 Empire State Buildings. Now, if you really knew what the African was doing, most of us would not be behaving like inferiors. We'd have challenged the system long time ago. The Africans had a fixation about 7. They had a fixation about 7. They created the 7-day week. There's no such thing, you know. The Africans noticed in Egypt that there are 7 orifices in the human body. I can't mention all of them. There's 7 primary colors in the rainbow: violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. There's 7 notes in the musical scale. There's 7 layers of skin. There's 7 parts of the human brain. There's 7 parts of the human eye. 7 is critical in the ages of man. 7 is the age of reason. 14, 7 years later, puberty. 21, 7 years later, maturation. 7, 7, 7, 7, 7. That is why they created the 7 deadly sins. Christ was in Egypt. He's not an Egyptian, he's a Jew. He was born in Jerusalem, but he went to Egypt. Read Hosea, out of Egypt shall I call my son. He was brought back to Jerusalem, where he was crucified. 7 deadly sins, 7 cardinal virtues, 7 days of the week. That's, the Africans created the 7-day week. There's no such thing. 7, 7, 7, 7, 7. And then they sent out 7 ships across the water. Now they had intimate interconnections with the rest of Africa. We have found evidence of that. Lady Lugard reports a visit of Egyptian pharaohs to Hausaland. We have found, and here is where Diop was very helpful to me, Diop and Obenga, the incredible things that we're finding now, we found in America, that the Egyptians made a trip to America. They sent out 7 ships. We found it in a tomb in Egypt, where these ships, 7 ships are heading towards the west. 7 was everything to them. So they sent out 7 ships. And we have it in this painting among the Ramesses around 1200 BC, these 7 ships heading towards the west. And we find intimate interconnections between the Egyptians and the rest of the Africans, because people could say, okay, Egypt is separate. Today it is, because the Egyptians are no longer Egyptians, just like the Americans are no longer Americans. You come into this room, it would be hard to find a Native American. You go to Egypt, and it's hard to find an Egyptian. So be very careful about the past and the present. These worlds have changed dramatically. And so we have lots of evidence of their links with the rest of Africa. Sheikh Anta Diop and Theophile Obenga presented, and it's in my new book, more than 100 words in Wolof, a West African language, the language of Sheikh Anta Diop, more than 100 words which are identical in all their forms. That is utterly impossible. UNESCO surrendered. All of these big professors with all their big degrees, so they had to surrender, because these 2 super Africans proved beyond them, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that that's all a lot of nonsense. It's clearly what we say it is. and they surrendered. It has been established beyond the shadow of a doubt. The connections between Egypt and the rest of Africa were extraordinary. We have Lady Lugar reporting on a visit of Egyptian pharaohs to Hausaland, an Egyptian golden breastplate found in an ancient layer in Nigeria, more than 100 Egyptian words in all their forms and variants found in Wolof, Diop's language. The African word for God, what is the word for God? Amen. You use it in your prayers. That's African. Amen. Jesus was in Egypt, you know. Out of Egypt shall I call my son. He wasn't an Egyptian, he was a Jew, but he went to Egypt. He was smuggled out by his uncle because they were killing off the firstborn. That's how Jesus landed up in Egypt. And the 7-day week is Egyptian. Egyptian golden breastplate found in ancient Nigeria. As I say, nearly 100 Egyptian words in all their forms presented to UNESCO. UNESCO had to surrender. They couldn't believe it. Obenga and Diop proved it beyond the shadow of a doubt. They even take the word for God. What is the word for God in Egypt? Amen. You saying it in your prayers, that's African. Amen. Amen and Amen is Egyptian, and Am is West African, comes from that, and Nyam is East African. So you have Amen and Amon Egyptian, and Am West African, and Nyam East African. Don't think everything is lost. There are all sorts of clues left in the past, and that if you learn certain things, you can pick them up. So they can't fool us anymore. And we find the incredible things that they did, the building of the pyramids and all these things, but they also built remarkable ships. And we have evidence, not only they show their ships moving, but they show, it is shown about Americans, the Popol for the Bible, the Quiche Maya. I have the Bible, the Quiche Maya, that shows blacks arrived in America before Christ. Champollion supports that, Lefebvre supports that, Sahagan supports that, Sorensen supports that, Sav Soderbergh supports that, Rosalie supports that. I've been through all these documents. They're finding these things and people are just pushing them aside, but not anymore. Then came the clincher. I was invited to, before the Columbus celebration, I was invited to the Smithsonian, the leading scientific institution in this country, hoping to wipe me out before 1992. And my opponent surrendered. Showed them the 7 braids that you can't argue with. No sculpture in America has 7 braids. 7 is everything to the African Egyptian. He created the 7-day week because he finds there's 7 parts to the human brain, 7 parts to the human eye, 7 notes in the musical scale, 7 primary colors in the rainbow, 7 orifices in the human body, 7 layers of skin. You can't argue with that. So he invented the 7-day week. All this thing about God created the world in 6 days and rested in the 7th, that is taken by the Christians from the Egyptians. Jesus was in Egypt. Even the word Christ, he's not Jesus Christ, he's Jesus the Christ. Christ is an Egyptian word, K-R-S-T, Christ. K-R-S-T, the anointed one. That's how he became the Christ. Don't dismiss him, okay? I'm just pointing out the terms, okay? He was in Egypt, out of Egypt. Read Hosea, out of Egypt shall I call my son. He wasn't born in Egypt, but he was smuggled out in Egypt because Herod was killing the firstborn. And he appears among the Egyptian doctors. And so you get certain evidences like that. And I've checked out this. I have so many sources. Champollion, reporting the 7 ships arriving from across the water. Champollion, Lefebvre, Sahagan, Sorensen, Sav Soderbergh, Rossellini, and above all, the Bible of the Quiche Maya. They destroyed so many books in America, but they didn't destroy all the Bibles of the Quiche Maya. So we have that reporting these dark-skinned people arriving on 7 ships, and they have the 7 ships. And then we have the clincher. We have a map of South America found in ancient Egypt, with correct latitudinal and longitudinal coordinates. I showed they have found a map of South America in ancient Egypt. It was known as the Piri Reis map because of a Turkish admiral who found it there, and it has correct latitudinal and longitudinal coordinates. No European could have drawn such a map until after 1744 when the chronometer was invented, yet the Africans had it before Christ.
You know what the most dangerous thing in America is, right? Nigger with a library card.
100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society. He finds himself in exile in his own land. Himself in exile in his own land. In his own land. In exile in his own land. Himself in exile in his own land. In his own land. 100 years later. 100 years later. 100 years later. The Negro is still languished in the corners of American society. He finds himself in exile in his own land. Himself in exile in his own land. In his own land. The Negro is still languished in the corners of American society. The Negro is still languished in the corners of American society. "100 years later,
You know what the most dangerous thing in America is, right? Nigger with a library card.
tell a kid that kid is the kid of a king, that kid will sometimes act a whole lot differently than a kid who really is in the throes of despair and really is kind of hopeless. And but I just don't see a lot of signs that I'm really going to make it in life. So I just kind of go through life and just find happiness where I can. When she knows the kind of potential that's in that DNA that's still in them, and DNA is not created anew, it's passed down. When you know those kings and queens and explorers and fighters and creators and inventors, when you know their DNA has been passed down and it's now in you, you'll start living up to it. They try to help us keep hope in a place that would like us to have no hope. They have a huge job on their hands. So, I understand it when they want to not take on additional hardship. Joshua took on the hardship. Jonah did not. When they told Jonah to go and take the message to his people in his sermon, he decided to get out of Dodge. He got on that boat and got swallowed up in the Pacific by a whale, because there ain't no whales in the Mediterranean. So, he was over here, and he was trying to get away. So that's what's facing the preachers now, our preachers. These things are coming back. It's not coming back because of me. It's just time. They are coming whether I'm going to be here or not. And they're going to have to deal with that, and they're going to have to use these things just the way that Christ was telling his disciples to use them. That was a new message they had when Christ came. It was new. You mentioned the non-profit thing. Now, Christ did tell his disciples, go out and to make sure that people know that your heart is right and that you're not in this for money and that you're in it for truth. And don't even have two coats apiece. Split it and share it with somebody else. Go, don't have money, don't have any of that. Let the people take care of you. I don't want you going looking like this is about money. That's what his instruction was to the people who were going to carry his religion. But even Christ, as a non-prophet, couldn't get anybody to really follow him but his few friends and disciples, not his friends, but those disciples, until John told him, follow him. Somebody else had to tell him to follow Christ. And then when he delivered that major message, they all walked away. Here is the original non-prophet. He was not for profit. He was not trying to get the house on the lake or the mistress home and any of that. He actually was the non-prophet. And they walked away from him too. We are very difficult people. And that's what these preachers are having to deal with. If it was that difficult for the Christ, where even Christ couldn't get us as a black people to get on board, then that says something. And that was a predominantly black crowd he was speaking with. Remember, Christ said, okay, I'll walk no more in jewelry. He was getting to another place. When the black king from Venezuela told him, I hear they're trying to kill you, but you know what? You come to my nation right here, I'll take care of you. We'll protect you. We'll keep you here. It was a racial thing by the time Rome had come into the Americas and taken the black city, Jerusalem, and some of those areas in South America where Antioch was. Now it was a huge race issue that was a part of the equation. Christ was dealing with a black audience, predominantly. And he couldn't even get them on board. When you read in the Old Testament, if it really is our history, and it is, remember there is that caveat. You kill your prophets, don't you? And it's talking to us.
A prophet has no honor in his own land.
No honor in his own home, but it also says you kill your prophets. And they do. They stole their prophets.
Still do.
I said we kill our prophets. It matter. If it did not matter, they would not have taken this young 30-something black wonder and made him white. If the color didn't matter, they wouldn't have repainted him as a white Christ. He's black. He's in a place where West Africa had come over all the time using a current. It's called the equatorial current that runs from West Africa to South America. You can throw a bottle in that current, and it's going to bring it over here. When you go into the records of even the 1300 ADs from West Africa, you will see the account of this king who sent over 400 ships. Well-known account by now. Ivan Van Sertima wrote about it. Basil Davidson wrote about it. Dr. Van Sertima, peace be unto him, actually quotes Basil Davidson. Old Testament is our own record. We wrote it. Now, just because somebody else gets it and then tries to edit it and change some things, they still left the record there. This is the most complete black history on the planet. The most complete. The Old Testament is covering more than 15,000 years of history, of black history, and it's about black history in the Americas. That's why it keeps talking about corn. Corn was only in the Americas in ancient times. When people say, well, no, you misunderstand. The English just used the word corn and they really meant other grain. No, when you go into those Old Testament narratives, it will actually name corn with barley, with wheat, and the other ones. When you look into the words, the old words that the English translations are interpreted from, you'll find different words for these different grains. When you go into ancient Egypt, when you look on Hatshepsut's temple, there is the American corn, the yellow corn in the green husk. When you read the Old Testament, it says the green ears of corn in its husk. When Christ is accused of blaspheming the Sabbath, it's because his disciples are picking corn and taking it and rubbing it in their hands and eating it. When Christ is at the woman at the well in Samaria, and he's telling them about the harvest season coming, and he tells them, you know it's harvest time when the corn turns white, you know, that white silk that comes out of, we're talking corn. We're in a land of corn. When David says, I kill bears and lions to protect my father's flock, what bear you know wears his hide in a desert place like the place now being called the Middle East? We got massive grapes during the time of Moses. We've got corn. We've got bears. We've got lions. We've got mountains. Jerusalem is in a mountain in Peru. You don't have that stuff over there. This is our history. But when they wanted to bring about the enslavement of the very people who are the holy people of the Old Testament and the New, then they had to destroy our history. So when they came into America in the 1500s and took that black city in Mexico that was called Tenochtitlan, where ancient Memphis had been, the orders that came with the soldiers was to get every writing, every book they could find, and to stack them up in the city streets and to burn them to ashes. That was the order. It's still in the record that that was the order. The Vatican had to do that. Because if you're the Vatican and you're sponsoring the invasion of the very place that was the Old Testament and the New, including the destruction of Jerusalem in South America, you don't want to be liable for that. And you're going to destroy the record. And they did it. But now, here's where we are. When it's all said and done, what I found in these 14 years of going through the records and staying in those records and working them and bringing the nuggets back out, what I found was that even the Greeks are us. These are the black ones who came out of West Africa, out of the Nigeria region, out of the place that the Old Testament is calling Argob, A-R-G-O-B. And it says in Argob, you're going to have this 2.5 tribes that's set up at the end of the Exodus that came out of the Americas, crossed through from Brazil, across the Atlantic. That's why they said across the flood. we set up 2.5 tribes. It wasn't flood. The term meant a lot of water. They were crossing the Atlantic. They set up 2.5 tribes in West Africa. Those came out of the tribe of Manasseh. You remember his descendant, Jair. So the place became known as Niger and Nigeria. With it being that major river in there, you get the term Nile for the river, Nile. Nu, it's Niger, Nigeria. So you have Mali there. You have Mali in the Old Testament. It's telling you those lands were in this region where the 2.5 tribes were set up. And when you have Argod there, when they came out to the massive World Black War in Central America, called the Trojan War at the Black City of Troy, that had been built on top of ancient Egypt's own city where Thoth had lived. When you have that happening, these people coming out of West Africa from Argod became known as Argives. When you check your histories, you find that's the first name of the Greeks. They set up ancient Greece in Central America. That's how deep it's gotten. We are all of that history. We are the Greeks. We are the ancient Egyptians. We are those shepherd kings called Hebrews. We are all of those. We are not the Jews. When Babylon came in and eventually destroyed the cities of the black cities in Central America, they still wanted the harvest, the food, and the mine resources. They brought in a new people. Now we got Jewish people that were coming in, put into these cities to repopulate them. And now the mixture and confusion comes in. When people say with as much fervor as they have said that the black mind is inferior, that the intellect is inferior, when you feel people say that and work as hard to make that be true as some people do, you have to understand that's because they actually fear the opposite. They know the histories. They have our histories. They know exactly that this is the people who formed Western civilization, who launched learning around the globe. They know that these people are the so-called Phoenicians who came out of Southeast Africa and put their colonies in Venezuela, where you'll find ancient Tyre. You'll find the others coming in and becoming ancient Egypt and ancient Greece, and coming in and becoming the so-called Aztec. These are those 2,400 ships from Senegal that left out in the early 1300s, arrived on the eastern coast of Mexico, came in and built their city where ancient Memphis, the earlier ancient West African city, had been. These are the things we are now bringing. When I would approach the major radio stations to bring this message forward, we don't hear anything come back from them. We know that the mainstream is going to balk at this. We know that the professors are going to balk at bringing this, and not necessarily because they're all racist and that they want to perpetuate the stereotype of white supremacy. They're trying to keep their job. When the white expert, Dr. Valapanova, accidentally found cocaine in the ancient Egyptian mummy, South America's cocaine, they ostracized her. They almost put her career out the window just for saying what was true and for bringing that forward. But that opens up so many cans of worms when you find ancient Egypt in South America. That gets close to what they had spent these last 500 years covering up. And they didn't want to lose the advantage that had come from that big cover-up. She got too close. Dr. Ivan van Sertima, when he started announcing the presence of the black presence in ancient America, the pre-Columbian black presence, all of a sudden, here are these scholars coming against them, funded by Jewish money. I didn't understand that. Why is it always the Jewish money that's behind keeping us from regaining these things? I didn't understand that until I found the ancient Egyptian city that they had built in Peru called Jerusalem. Once you find that, now you understand why they don't want you to know about the black histories that had happened in Central and South and even North America. I hope that even we, our own nation, our own people, can take the information that's coming and make it theirs without somebody else telling them it's okay, like you suggested earlier. Because for some reason, our people are people that they know are motivated by what they call the law of fascination. Right. If it becomes fascinating, if it's something that they can claim as status, if they can go to a show and say they went and you didn't, then they'll go to that show. It doesn't matter if it's any good or not. You know, it'll be a Tyler Perry production that might not bring out the very best of us as a people, but they'll be able to say, I went to that and you didn't. It's a status thing. Right. It's a law of fascination, and they know we're fascinated. We'll buy that Gucci bag. So when this kind of thing becomes and has the law of fascination behind it, yeah, then we will accept it. But if the black mass media won't do it, we won't get it. We had so much resistance from our own people who just couldn't get it. They just could not begin to think they were such a people as had been found. It took years.
You know what that reminds me of? Keith, what was the name of the gentleman here who did prison time? Geronimo Pratt. Remember that?
Right.
When Geronimo did his book, and I'm always reminded of that, Mr. Butler, it was picked up by a major publishing company. They had a white writer to write it. They gave one major book signer for him, gave him a big advance, and made the book history. Now, that was very important for them to do that, because people knew that if they had a son or grandson that was incarcerated, and down in their heart and their spirit told them that that person was innocent, was railroaded, if they had that book on their shelf, if they remembered Geronimo Pratt, it would give them the fortitude to fight harder, to stay in the ring longer, to understand the perception and what's the possibility of people being incarcerated if they're not doing anything. That was a very important piece. So they had to make sure that give him a lot of money, and we would make sure this book would not be seen no place in the next world.
Wow. Well, I made the decision to go on and put it out without the huge support of the publicity machine of the New York publishers. And, you know, I just knew I would be able to count on the black media and others, and I was totally wrong. The black preachers ran, the black scholars ran to protect their jobs. When the media didn't come on board and the professors kind of shied away, then, you know, it made it become almost an underground phenomenon. But people found out about it, and they were just taking it off of the shelves wherever they could find it. Here's the deal behind Columbus, and we'll be brief with this one. Columbus was not looking for a new world. He knew the Americans were over here. We didn't know that. They didn't tell us that America had gone, that Columbus had gone to West Africa before he came over here. He had gone to the very place where the people were crossing the Atlantic coming to the Americas and had been doing it over 15,000 years. He'd gone to where Elmina was. And now suddenly he comes back to Europe with this fire to want to go across the Atlantic. And when you check his notes, when you check what he left in his biography by Washington Irving, Columbus is saying, when I get there, I'm going to be the one to reconquer Jerusalem. He knew exactly where he was coming. When you see Columbus talk about the island of Sapinga, we say, that's Japan. No, it's not. When you look at Mexico, in that black civilization where ancient Memphis had been, where Mexico City is now built on top of ancient Memphis, they had a man-made sea that they had built there. And one of the islands in there was Topanga. He knew exactly where he was going. He knew that Topanga was in the Memphis region and Jerusalem was in Peru region. When you read the chronicles of Europe invading America in the 1500s, you find this extraordinary thing that they write the invasion of Mexico and Peru. Well, if you just found the Americas and you just found Mexico, how in the world do you know about Peru hidden on the western side of South America?
Except that's important to perpetuate that lie.
Yeah, of course it is. It's the advantage. As long as we don't know who we are, then we won't live up to the DNA potential. He was referring to what Isaiah had written in 1925, when Isaiah saying that God says, "Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria the work of my hand, and Israel mine inheritance." Some will even think that that means the people in place now called Israel is to inherit the chosen status. That's not what he was saying at all. When the black nations had come over from Africa and those that were already in the Americas, when they formed Egypt, the empire of kingdoms called Egypt in South America and Central America, which is why those pyramids all over the place. When they formed that, they wrote those histories, and they wrote them in records that we now have as the Old Testament. The man who founded Egypt, again, his name was Amen, A-M-E-N. That's not an argument. Anyone can find that in the record, in the ancient Egyptian records. He's Amen. They sometimes spelled his name A-M-U-N, A-M-O-N, A-M-M-O-N. He's Amen. He's the same Amen that we see in the Old Testament. But when you really want to understand Amen, you go to Revelation 3 and 14, where it says Amen is a person who lived at the beginning of God's creation. When ancient Egypt wrote its history, Amen was the founder. He is at the beginning of that creation of Egypt. They were not writing a history of the planet, which is why his son came to go into another city and find a wife in another city. They were not writing the history of the planet. They were writing the history of their nation, of their black nation, from the founding of the Amen. And the Old Testament ends when Egypt's city sees Jerusalem fall. That's amazing.
Perhaps the most remarkable record of the exodus from Atlantis is preserved in the 1,500-year-old pottery of a Peruvian tribe called the Mochica. In their vases and utensils, they depicted Orientals and Negroes, Arabs, Indians, Egyptians, and Greeks, people who might have been known to each other in Atlantis. In the
America by Leo Wiener. This was done, I think, in the 1920s. The problem with Leo Wiener, however, he was strictly a linguist. And I felt that finding a number of African words in America would not be enough to prove the point. To prove something like that, which would overturn a great amount of thinking, would call for a vast body of evidence in many fields. So I actually began a critique of this. 30 years ago, I actually began to attack my own subject. I didn't know it would become my subject. And I turned the page, there were 7 images of Africans. John Williams, the novelist, author of The Man Who Cried I Am, had been to Mexico and met a strange German, last of the Royal House of Germany. Hitler put him in charge of the German embassy in D.C. And something happened, and he was dismissed. I was later to find out why he was dismissed by Hitler, because Hitler sent around a circular saying, that everyone in the diplomatic service has to sign a statement saying they're a pure Aryan. And von Wutenow wrote back. Now, he was a conch, the last of the royal house in Germany. This was strange for von Wutenow, strange for anybody in that position. Wrote back to say, there is no such thing as a pure Aryan. All people have black blood. Oh, God, he had to flee after that, because Hitler would have gotten him. So I rushed off to Mexico to meet this strange man. And I went to his chateau. And he'd heard about me because I had written him first and told him what I had done. And we sat in that place, okay? We sat on his steps half the night arguing because he couldn't. You have to show me a hell of a lot of evidence to convince me of something that everybody believes is true history. And he says, I said, I have to see these heads. He said, I have a few in my study. I said, that's not good enough. I have to be sure that they are valid, that you're not making this up. He was a little annoyed by that. He wanted to throw me out of the house. But nonetheless, I persisted. You have to prove this to me. I need to see sculptures of these people. He says they're not in the big museums. They don't take chances like that in the big museums. You have to go to private collections. And the next day he started to take me to private collections, and I was utterly stunned. You would be surprised how much history is hidden in private museums. They don't allow these things in the big places. It's just like in Egypt. I am responsible for returning to the modern Egyptians the splinters of the Sphinx's nose and chin which Napoleon's army blew off. A friend of mine, Garland Roberts, an adventurer, he was in England. He went into the British Museum and he found that they had the splinters of the Sphinx's nose and chin. How he did that, but he's a fellow, he's a daredevil. He would risk his life just to prove a point. And I says, you go back there. I'm going to pay your way to Britain. You go back and photograph the damn thing. Pretend you are a, messenger boy, whatever it is, get a job there, get the damn thing. And he brought back startling pictures. And I called Sheikh Anta Diop, the head of the radiocarbon laboratory in Dakar. He's dead now. He was the leading African scientist. And I got in touch with him and I told him what had happened. And I got in touch with Gamal Abdel Mokhtar, the Arab delegate at UNESCO. Sheikh Anta was at UNESCO too. And I got in touch with, I told Garland Roberts, he has to be on the phone. And we started a conversation with the British Museum. And I started out by saying, sir, we understand and we have hard visual proof that you have the splinters of the Sphinx's nose and chin in your museum. And I have the Arab delegate at UNESCO here and the African delegate, etc. And we'd like to negotiate the return of the splinters of the Sphinx's nose and chin to the Egyptians. Now, Keika. No, Van Sertima, we can't do that. See, most of the things we have in our museums come from all over the world. If we started returning things to this and that country, we'll have no museums. I said, sir, we're not asking you to destroy the museum. This is a specific object. This is a matter of the very gravest importance. I have on the line with me Gamal Abdel Mokhtar, the Arab delegate, Sheikh Anta Diop, the African delegate, myself, Garland Roberts, who has proof that they were the pieces, as me, he photographed them. And he said, well, we will consider it. Do you know? Sheikh Anta spoke. I had a French translator. Sheikh Anta spoke. I spoke. Garland Roberts spoke. Do you know the Arab delegate? We're returning it to the bloody Arabs, He never said a bloody word. Because the Arabs are not Egyptian. Don't make any mistake about that. It's just like we're in this room here. This is America. It would be hard to find a Native American in this room. The world has changed dramatically. There have been half a dozen invasions of Egypt, the Persians, the Greeks, the Syrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs. That is not Egypt. Egypt is no longer Egyptian. They have not a damn thing to do with the building of the pyramids. We now have hard proof, very hard proof, that Egypt was African when the pyramids were built. There is no question about it. This is not guesswork. This is not theory. We found the skeletons in the ancient graves. We found sculptures, which you'll never see when you go to Egypt. They don't put those things on display. But now we have the hard proof. And I'll deal with that later.
No, this is done by those who were guilty of all those things that you just, the counterpart of all those things you just mentioned. The white people who were guilty of white supremacy try and hide their own guilt by accusing the Honorable Elijah Muhammad of teaching black supremacy when he tries to uplift the mentality, the social, mental, economic condition of black people in this country. And Jews who have been guilty of exploiting the black people in this country economically, civically, and otherwise, hide their guilt by accusing the Honorable Elijah Muhammad of teaching, of being anti-Semitic, simply because he teaches our people to go into business for ourselves and try and take over the economic leadership in our own community. And this other thing, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and what was this other?
And hatred.
And hatred. And since the white people collectively have practiced the worst form of hatred against Negroes in this country, and they know that they are guilty of it, now when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad comes along and begins to list the historic deeds, the historic attitude, the historic behavior of the white man in this country toward the black people in this country, again, the white people are so guilty that they can't stop doing these things to make Mr. Muhammad appear wrong, so they hide their wrong by saying that he is teaching hatred. History is not hatred. Actually, we are Muslims because we believe in the religion of Islam. We believe in one God. We believe in Muhammad as the apostle of God. We practice the principles of the religion of Islam, which mean prayer, charity, fasting, brotherhood. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that since the Western society is deteriorating, it has become overrun with immorality, that God is going to judge it and destroy it. And the only way black people who are in this society can be saved is to not integrate into this corrupt society, but separate ourselves from it, reform ourselves, lift up our moral standards, and try and be godly instead of try and integrate with God instead of trying to integrate with the white man, or try and imitate God instead of trying to imitate with
Talk about one of the most pervasive beliefs in the general society about the Nation of Islam, and that is that it is an organization dedicated to the use of violent means to attain its goals. The question I have is, how true is this, and why do you think it persists in society?
Well, the Muslims who have accepted the religion of Islam and follow the religious guidance of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad have never bombed any churches, have never murdered any little girls, as was done in Birmingham, have never lynched anybody, have never at any time been guilty of initiating any aggressive acts of violence during the entire 33 years or more that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has been teaching us. The charge of violence against us actually stems from the guilt complex that exists in the conscious and subconscious minds of most white people in this country. They know that they've been violent in their brutality against Negroes, and they feel that someday the Negro is going to wake up and try and do unto them as they have done do unto the whites as the whites have done unto us. We aren't a violent group. We are taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to obey the law, to respect everyone who respects us. We're taught to display courtesy, to be polite. But we're also taught that at any time anyone in any way inflicts or seeks to inflict violence upon us, we are within our religious rights to retaliate in self-defense to the maximum degree of our ability. We never initiate any violence upon anyone, but if anyone attacks us, we reserve the right to defend ourselves. So to accuse us of being violent is like accusing a man who is being lynched, who is being hung on a tree, simply because he struggles vigorously against his lyncher. The victim is accused of violence, but the lyncher is never accused of violence. And I only point this out because the various racist groups that are set up in this country by whites and who have actually practiced violence against blacks for 400 years are never associated or identified or made synonymous with the term violence. But whites speak of Muslims almost synonymously with violence. Whenever Muslims are mentioned by them, violence is brought up. But it's not connected with any other group. This is a sort of a propaganda tactic, or what I would call psychological warfare, to in some way make the image of the Muslims in this country be a violent image rather than a religious image.
What's interesting is that members of the Nation of Islam have not used violence even when black Americans were attacked. How do you account for this? Does this in any way contradict some of the basic premises of your movement?
I don't know how you mean.
Well, you maintain, for example, that you will not, or that you should not use violence unless you are attacked by the white man. And I think we can note in the last several years, certainly, dozens and dozens and dozens of instances in which Negroes have been attacked, killed in some instances.
You mean in these demonstrations?
These demonstrations and the bombings, for example, recently in Birmingham, where they killed 4 little Negro girls. And what interests me is the fact is that the Nation of Islam has not done anything to retaliate.
I think you should be happy.
The important thing is, does your lack of action contradict any of your basic principles?
I'll explain it. You should be happy that Muslims who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, number one, don't believe in any form of integration, and who believe that every mention of the word integration by whites, whether it be from the mouth of Kennedy on down to the mouth of the lowest, raggediest white liberal in the street who is beatnik-like involving himself in these integration efforts, if we believed in it, we would integrate, and we would fight anybody who got in our way or made any effort whatsoever to stop us from integrating. If we really believed that the law of the land, the Supreme Court, and other so-called judicial bodies were for real when they talked about integration, we would integrate. And knowing that the law was on our side, and any effort we made to demonstrate toward integration, why, we would know the law should be on our side, if it's the law of the land. If it is the law of the land, then the demonstrators are within the law, and the discriminators are against the law. But to show you the hypocrisy of the law, when Negroes demonstrate for integration, instead of arresting the discriminators, the law arrests the demonstrators. So this is a foolish move on the part of Negroes. And when you foolishly get yourself involved with an enemy, then whatever comes upon you, that's your business. As Muslims, we believe that separation is the best way and the only sensible way, not integration. And but on the other hand, when we see our people being brutalized by white bigots, white racists, we think that they are foolish to allow themselves to be beaten and brutalized and do nothing whatsoever to protect themselves. They are foolish. They should have the right to defend themselves against any attack made against them by anyone. If a dog is biting a black man, the black man should kill the dog. Whether the dog is a police dog, a hound dog, or any kind of dog. If a dog is sick on a black man, when that black man is doing nothing but trying to take advantage of what the government says is supposed to be his, then that black man should kill that dog, or any two-legged dog who sicks the dog on it.
Should other black men help that particular person who was attacked?
I think you'll find, sir, that there will come a time when black people wake up and become intellectually independent enough to think for themselves, as other humans are intellectually independent enough to think for themselves. Then the black man will think like a black man, and he will feel for other black people. And this new thinking and feeling will cause black people to stick together. And then at that point, you'll have a situation where when you attack one black man, you are attacking all black men. And this type of black thinking will cause all black people to stick together. And this type of thinking also will bring an end to the brutality inflicted upon black people by white people. And it is the only thing that will bring an end to it. No federal court, state court, or city court will bring an end to it. It's something that the black man has to bring an end to himself.
One, is it then your assertion that the laws with respect to how Negroes are supposed to have equal opportunity and equal rights in this country are not meaningful or believed by whites? And secondly, what is your opinion and attitude toward the civil rights movement in general, and particularly the Reverend Martin Luther King and his philosophy of nonviolent direct action?
If the white people really passed meaningful laws, it would not be necessary to pass any more laws. There are already enough laws on the law books to protect an American citizen. You only need additional laws when you're dealing with someone who's not regarded as an American citizen. But whites are so hypocritical. They don't want to admit that this black man is not a citizen. So they classify him as a second-class citizen to get around making him a real citizen. If he was a real citizen, you'd need no more laws. You'd need no civil rights legislation. Civil rights, when you have civil rights, you have citizenship. It's automatic. White people don't need laws to protect their citizenship because they're citizens. But they don't want to tell us we're not citizens. And at the same time, they don't want to pass laws that are meaningful enough to protect us as if we were citizens. And the Supreme Court desegregation decision is the best example I know. That's a law from the Supreme Court. 10 years have gone by. No desegregated schools. It hasn't been implemented beyond, I think, 9% in 10 years. So this just shows you the hypocrisy of the American white man. They talk out of both sides of their mouth. And for this reason, we who are Muslims, that is, who believe in the religion of Islam, who believe in God, we don't believe that black people will ever get any laws, get any problem with laws being passed or new persons being put in office, white liberals being put in office. There is nothing that the white man will ever do to bring about true, sincere citizenship or civil rights recognition for black people in this country. Nothing will they ever do. They will always talk it, but they won't practice it. And with the Supreme Court, if the NAACP can tell me that they want a desegregation decision for me 10 years ago, but yet the schools haven't been desegregated, as I say, this is a victory with no victory. It's a victory that you can talk about, but it's a victory you can't show me. So if you represent the NAACP and you're telling me about this great victory you won for me, when I look at you, I have to conclude that either you have been duped yourself or else you are trying to dupe me. And in most instances where the civil rights struggle is involved, there is no civil rights leader can point to me one concrete gain, practical gain, that black people have made in the civil rights field in this country, not only during the past 10 years, but during the past 100 years.
Now, the other part was with respect to Mr. King and the nonviolent direct action.
Well, I will let Jimmy Baldwin and John Killens and Lou Lomax, the writers, answer that. Speaking right after this church was bombed in Birmingham, Christian church was bombed in Birmingham by Christians too, mind you, and these 4 little girls were murdered. John Killens and James Baldwin and Lomax and the Negro writers and actors had a meeting at the town hall in New York, and Killen pointed out concerning these murders of these little girls, said the killings had raised doubts about the intelligence of the nonviolence in the civil rights struggle. He went on to declare that he could no longer be asked to love those who persecuted and killed Negroes. He also, and the writer, Mr. Handler, who's describing this, said that Killens, it was not clear concerning Killens' remarks to his audience that he was breaking with it was clear rather to his audience that he was breaking with the doctrine of the Reverend Martin Luther King's philosophy that as Christians, Negroes should love their fellow man in a truly religious sense. Now, James Baldwin, speaking on that same platform, said, and I was present during this entire affair, asserted that the American people shared a collective guilt for the persecution of Negroes, much as Germans did because of their silence during the Nazi persecution. He denounced President Kennedy for what he termed Kennedy's lack of passion in the civil rights struggle. Mr. Baldwin said that there could no longer be a Republican Party for the Negro people as long as it listed a Barry Goldwater, nor a Democratic Party for the Negro people with a Senator Eastland on its roster. He asserted that the federal government acted swiftly and energetically, that unless the federal government acted swiftly and energetically, future slaughter would make Birmingham look like a dress rehearsal. And now, what do I think about King's attitude? King's right-hand man, Wyatt Walker, at King's convention, according to the New York Times on September the 26th, said, quote, "We have been duped," meaning these persons involved in the civil rights struggle, of which King is the symbolic leader. His right-hand man says, and I quote, "We have been duped, or have duped ourselves, into believing that the chains have been broken, when in truth we have only been chained more securely. Half freedom has in many instances been worse than no freedom at all." Why, don't ask me what I think about their struggle. I can tell you what they think about their struggle. And they are pointing out that it is becoming more difficult every day for the civil rights leaders to keep the masses of black people nonviolent and long-suffering and patient and keep them from becoming disenchanted. I hope that answers your question.
Well, now there's a new party which has started on the East Coast called the Freedom Now Party, an all-black organization.
I'm not familiar with the Freedom Now Party. I'm not too familiar with politics, period, only that in the sense that white politicians have usually been very hypocritical where the so-called Negroes are concerned. So I'm a bit disenchanted with politicians and politics. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad is a religious man, and his teaching is religious and his solutions are religious. The Freedom Now Party, from what I understand, is headed by a lawyer named Conrad Lynn. I know him. He probably means well. Before passing an opinion on what it is he's trying to do, I would like to analyze it and see who's subsidizing him, see who his friends are, especially who his white friends are. And after a careful analysis, if I could conclude that there was no white support, I would be inclined to have confidence in it. But if I saw him leaning too heavily upon his white liberal friends for support, then I'd be suspicious of that too. The Muslims, in my opinion, represent an all-black party. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad pointed out at before 10,000 in Philadelphia on September the 29th at a rally that we were having, that in 1964 the black people should band together and do something about selecting and electing representatives, black representatives, politically, who have the rights and the the best interests of the black people at heart, and that we should also unite together and sweep out of office all of the black political puppets who are used by the white power structure to continue white supremacy in our communities.
In that regard, would you include Congressman Dawson, for example, from Chicago, and some of the people who represent him on the Chicago City Council?
In which regard?
In the area of acting as a puppet.
I don't know what Mr. Muhammad's opinion is of Congressman Dawson. They both live right there in the city of Chicago together. I don't know what his opinion is of Congressman Dawson. I'm suspicious of any Negro, be he politician, be he clergyman, or civic leader who is constantly patted on the back by whites. I have a tendency to lead toward the Negro politician who is constantly condemned by the white power structure. This is my thought pattern. I'm giving you an insight of it.
You, though, mentioned Mr. Lynn and saying you'd like to know who his white friends are. Now, I'm wondering if you didn't make a contradictory statement in Muslim terms by using white and friend in the same phrase. That is
I
to
use
say,
friend in quotes.
I see. In other words, if a black man cannot have a white man as a friend.
He may have a white man who's friendly, but being friendly and being a friend, I think, are two different things. I think there are many whites who act friendly toward Negroes. A fox acts friendly toward the lamb. And usually the fox is the one who ends up with the lamb chop on his plate. The wolf doesn't act friendly, and therefore the wolf has more difficulty in getting the lamb chop in his plate.
I'd like to point out, though, that...
And I say that because it is usually if you study the structure of the Negro community, economically, politically, civically, psychologically, and otherwise, it's controlled by the white liberal, who usually poses as the friend of the Negro, who actually differs from the white conservative in the same way that the fox differs from the wolf. Their appetite is the same. Their motives are the same. It's only their mannerisms and methods that differ.
I would agree that no doubt there have been a large number of whites who have posed as liberals and as friends of the Negro and who have time and again betrayed the Negro. On the other hand, I think one could point to a large number of whites who have struggled for civil rights, for equality, and have got little or nothing out of it, other than quite a few bruises.
Give me an example.
Well, the large number of white students who have gone into the South, for example, working for SNCC and other organizations.
Not working for SNCC or other organizations, but working for the white political machines who benefit by the voting efforts of Negroes.
Okay, I'll be more specific. I would cite Herbert Hill, for example, as a kind of person who has championed Negro job rights, for example, in New York City and elsewhere. He has fought the political machine.
First time I met Herbert Hill personally was when they were picketing to stop the working on the Harlem Hospital in Harlem. Negroes for 10 years had to fight the city to get an annex built on the Harlem Hospital. Because in Harlem we need a hospital more so than anything else. Our people are sick. Plus we do a lot of cutting and shooting of each other, though we profess to be nonviolent. And Herbert Hill brought his forces out and stopped the working on that site. This is the first time I ever saw him. Then when work was brought to a halt on a hospital in Harlem, the same was tried to stop the work at the Downstate Medical Center in Brooklyn, which is predominantly white. They were out there for 3 months during the summer. Couldn't stop anything. And I never saw Herbert Hill out there one time. Now, whenever it takes a stoppage of something that's going to affect the white man, you find the white liberal absent. But when it involves something that primarily will affect the best interests of black people, and black people only, then that white liberal is present. Herbert Hill is the labor secretary for the NAACP. And if he was interested in black people, he would prepare a black man with the type of knowledge and understanding of the labor troubles involving black people that would enable a black man to sit in the same position as Secretary of Labor or Labor Secretary in the NAACP. I'm suspicious of whites who join Negroes and always have to be in the lead, who always have to be the head, who always have to be at the top in Negro organizations. those whites who really have the interest of blacks at heart, let them give some advice to some Negroes and stand on the sideline. But don't join the organization and then get at the head of it and pose as a friend of Negroes.
Well, I would defend his sincerity and his commitment. And more than that, I would say that just because a person is a Negro or a black American does not mean he's going to struggle for Negro rights or for jobs for Negroes or anything else. I think that today you could point to a large number of Negro leaders who have consistently betrayed Negroes in a whole host of areas.
They aren't really Negro leaders. These are puppets that have been put in front of the Negro community by white liberals. These are parrots that have been put in front of the Negro community by white liberals. You can't name me a Negro leader who has been betrayed Negroes, who has not been endorsed, sanctioned, subsidized, and supported by the white liberals.
Minister Malcolm, I'd like to... Well, I could cite one example would be Congressman Dawson, for example, in Chicago. In Chicago, a large number of liberals located in the Hyde Park district have consistently fought Dawson and his betrayals of the Negro, and they've also fought some of the people who represent Dawson on the Chicago City Council.
The only Negro I know who is constantly fought, only Negro politician that I know who is constantly fought by white liberals is Adam Clayton Powell. And they call him a racist because he speaks so bluntly on the race issue. But I'm not, as I said, not too familiar with Dawson and his work. And all over this world today, God himself has brought about political changes, a political atmosphere, social atmosphere, economic atmosphere. These economic conditions, these political conditions and social conditions combine to bring about a situation that is making black people in America more receptive, their mind more fertile to the seed of truth that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has been planting for 30-some years. And this is springing up today and causing our people to see and understand now what they couldn't see and understand before.
What is the nature of this situation which is making black people more receptive?
Well, you take in the past, say, 15 years, how the nations have emerged, dark nations have emerged in Africa. Prior to 10 years ago, most Negroes identified Africa with a savage, jungle-like place. And whenever you mentioned the word African, in their mind's eye, they could see the image of someone running around with a spear, with no language, who'd say Ugga Bugga Boo or Bwana or something, and who'd be in a jungle running from lions or chasing lions. But then when, after the war, when the United Nations was set up in New York City, black people began to look at men like Tom Mboya. They began to look at men like Nkrumah. They began to see men like Lumumba. They began to see men like Nasser. They began to see these Belawa and Azikwe, who could exchange intellectually with whites on an international level in a political forum and hold their own. This made the black people in this country realize that what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had been teaching all the time actually had substance. And they began to turn it over in their mind and see that what he was saying had more weight to it than what these other Negroes were saying. And they began to identify themselves with the black world and the black struggle more closely than they identified themselves with this so-called white world.
According to Essien, Mr. Muhammad states, "Up, you mighty race. You can accomplish what you willed. Build your future on these foundations: freedom, justice, and equality." What is the definition of freedom, justice, and equality for the black man, and where and when is it to be attained?
Well, take equality first. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad doesn't teach us to associate equality with whites. Equality has nothing to do with whites. We don't want to be equal with the white man. He's not the criteria or yardstick by which equality is measured. He's not in a position to tell us we are equal. It's not his right. It's not his to do. Equality, we want equality. We had equality before the white man was created. We had equality before the white man came into existence. And we want equality whether the white man is on this earth or not. Equality means the opportunity to develop all of our dormant potential, all of our dormant capability. And in developing this dormant capability, the right and the ability to stand on this earth on some land of our own and bring about a civilization and a society in which we will be completely independent, complete freedom to take care of the needs, to take care of the wants and the likes and the dislikes of our people, to establish our own nation, our own society, our own heaven, our own future. This is what we mean by freedom, by equality. And justice means as you sow, so shall you reap. If you do wrong, you'll get wrong in return. And if you do right, you'll get right in return. When you're in your own nation, in your own land, you're in a position to get justice. But when you're in another man's country, in another man's land, under another man's flag, and under another man's government, and under another man's court system, you have to look to that other man for justice, and you'll never get it. And Negroes in this country probably are authorities on that.
Yeah. To what extent does this formulation approach that expounded by Zionists? They, for example, many Zionists maintain they could never expect justice in the Tsarist courts and the courts found in other countries in Eastern Europe and so on. And they decided that it would be wise to establish a separate state in Israel.
And all of the world powers got together, the white world powers, I should say, got together and helped all of these white Jews to establish a separate state in the heart of dark-skinned people's territory. And if white people can get together and let other whites, help other whites to establish an independent nation right in the midst of dark-skinned people, and then we don't see where white people should be so much against the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's solution, not of setting up an independent dark nation in white people's property, but he's asking the opportunity to set up an independent nation on our own continent. Let us leave America and go back home among our own people on our own land and set up our own independent society. But all he says is that this government, which made us slaves, should supply the transportation for us to get back home and give us all of the machinery and the tools necessary for us to till the soil and establish our own agricultural system to feed and clothe our people, our own economy, and in some way become an independent people among our own people on our own continent. This is intelligent, and Zionists should never criticize us.
You say then that the United States is not the black man's country.
Definitely
American laws are not black man's laws.
No.
American laws are not the black man's laws.
Well, the laws here in America were made by white people for the benefit of white people. The Constitution was written by whites for the benefit of whites. It was never written for the benefit of blacks. And when you read the Constitution, I think in Article 1, Section 2, or Section 1, Article 1, one of the two, and it's in the Constitution, it says that it classifies black people as 3/5 of a man. 3/5 of a man, subhuman, less than a human being. It relegates us to the level of cattle, hogs, chickens, cows, a commodity that could be bought and sold at the will of the master. No, it was written by whites for the benefit of whites and to the detriment of blacks. And when a black man stands up talking about his constitutional rights, he's out of his mind.
Minister Malcolm, in our textbook, which the students have read, supposedly, there is a statement, which is a quotation from Essien and essentially that from Lincoln, to the effect that the Nation of Islam does not have a great deal of support in the Negro community in this country by and large. And a recent national poll of American Negroes found that leaders and rank and file, according to their statistics, supported the Reverend Martin Luther King somewhere over 90%, whereas the support and favorable rating that they gave Minister Muhammad was less than 20%, and somewhere around 45% of them gave an unfavorable rating to Mr. Muhammad. What would your response be in terms of Baldwin's statement that this is a growing thing and the kinds of evidence that we have that there isn't much to it?
Well, that statement I just made concerning the Constitution is Article 1, Section 2 in the Constitution, where it classifies us as chattel. Baldwin did point out that Mr. Muhammad has the only grassroots support and is the only one whose whole following operates or functions on the mass vehicle. And I think Baldwin told Dr. Kenneth Clark that Martin Luther King is at the end of his rope. Now, concerning the poll taken by Newsweek magazine, I think you said that this was the leaders who said that, who went with King and against Mr. Muhammad around 90%. I just told you a little while ago, these leaders that they call leaders, this included Lena Horne, this included Dick Gregory, and this included comedians, comics, trumpet players, baseball players. Show me in the white community where a comedian is a white leader. Show me in the white community where a singer is a white leader, or a dancer or a trumpet player is a white leader. These aren't leaders. These are puppets and clowns that have been set up over the white community and over the black community by the white community and have been made celebrities and usually say exactly what they know that the white man wants to hear. And it is an honor, actually, that they endorsed Dr. Martin Luther King and were against the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That's actually an honor. Now, when you say that they also, in the same Newsweek poll magazine, I think the pollster said that he went into the Negro community and asked about the Muslims. And many Negroes whom he asked said, well, I never heard of the Muslims. Who are they? You know,
this is the rank and file we're talking about.
Oh, yeah. Now, when they got down to the rank and file, this was the answers that they got. This is equivalent to the situation in Kenya during the Mau Mau uprising, when many frightened whites in Kenya, Africa, would go among the Africans and ask them, what about the Mau Mau? And the African would say, I never heard of them. And the same white man who would ask the African this question and very naively believe what the African said, when he went to bed that night, he would lose his head. And usually the one who took his head was the same African who told him that afternoon he had never heard of the Mau Mau.
Except in the Newsweek poll, they used Negro interviewers.
You'll find that oftentimes Negroes are as much on guard around Negro interviewers, who usually represent the bourgeois element of Negroes, as they are on guard around whites. Usually Negroes know that when this bourgeois Negro walks through the door, he is not doing something that he's initiated himself, but he's involved in something in which the white man is the absolute author of and has sent him to the Negro community for some information. And when they give that Negro some information, usually they give him the information that they want him to take back to the white man, because that's who he's going to take it back to.
Our time is just about up, Minister Malcolm, and perhaps you could summarize and conclude by giving us, in your opinion or in the opinion of Mr. Elijah Muhammad, what would be the ideal solution to the racial problem in the United States today?
Well, on Thursday, October the 3rd, the New York Tribune, in an editorial, pointed out in Boston, in an article called The Civil Rights Iceberg, they pointed out how Kennedy had realized that beneath the water, the civil rights whole problem was political suicide. Because in his own hometown, the head of the Board of Education, a woman named Mrs. Hicks, was running against the NAACP philosophy, and she swept aside all other opposition. The whole white community supported her in opposition to the NAACP's desire for integrated schools, integrated housing, and otherwise. So I say that to say this, that even the Jewish community, which is supposed to be pro-liberal, went against the NAACP. Whites are against integration in practice, but they're for it in principle. So the only solution is separation. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad says that this can be brought about simply by letting our people be exposed to the truth about ourselves, about the white man, about our history and our condition in this country. And once we are exposed to the complete truth about things as they actually exist in this country, the masses of black people will choose complete separation from this entire system, political system, economic system, social system, and whatever other aspect or description or adjective you want to attach to it. Let us go back home to our own people, live among our own kind, and solve our own problems ourselves. And if the white man doesn't want us to go back to our own people and live in our own country, then since we can't get along together in peace on this country with white people, Let us separate part of this continent, migrate to that separate territory. Let the government give us everything we need to establish our own independent economic system and society, and thereby we'll be able to solve our own problems ourselves and prove that we are human beings and a part of the human family and can do for ourselves what other humans have done for themselves. And then we'll be able to stop blaming the white man for what he has done and stop begging the white man to solve our problems. We'll be able to solve our problems ourselves.
Thank you very much. That's it.
The secret society has its origin in the Moorish system. As a matter of fact, the actual outfits that the Klan wear. I'm not talking about the ones where you see somebody cut some holes in some sheets, but I'm talking about the real Grand Master outfits and the ones that's really done up with, you know, with the actual cross and the robe with the cape and the pine cone hat. That's all Egyptian initiation outfits brought up into Europe by the Moors. And so in order to give you a history of that and a history of what the Klan is, as well as a history of basically how they operate now, we have to give you the general history of modern day Masonic organizations. In order to do this, we need to understand a little more about the Moors and the concept and basically what was the divine plan. The Moors are nothing but a consortium of Camite Egyptians. For the people that don't know what Camite means, or Kemet, or Camite, or Egyptian priesthood, mainly the temple of Kom-Ombo in Egypt, or Kemet, the temple of Isis, or Aset, the last temple of Isis, which was one of the last temples to be closed at Philae, as well as other Sufi orders in Arabia that have their origin in what is called Kushite Arabia institution. And they set up those particular things in those particular societies. So what are some of the sciences that basically the Moors brought? Well, we know of all the learning and all the stuff that the Afrocentric movement told you, all of the stuff that the Moors brought. But let's get into some of the esoteric traditions. Basically, when you go in those New Age stores, and all that stuff that they got the New Age stores is dealing with, is nothing but all of the stuff that they basically conserved from the Moorish science of all of the stuff that secret societies had. And you see all that stuff, they give it a new name. Esoteric teachings, New Age, and all that stuff. All that is nothing but Moorish science that they basically became the custodians of. And now trying to fake as being white in these so-called New Age bookstores, or what they call occult bookstores. So your tarot cards, you see them, this fortune telling, the tarot, that was introduced by the Moors. From the tarot cards, you get the playing cards, introduced by the Moors. You see what I'm saying? All your divination systems, they got little stuff they throw down, little stones called runes, introduced by the Moors. The crystal ball, this is real deal stuff that works, divination, introduced by the Moors. Your incense, frankincense and myrrh, all that introduced by the Moors. Gunpowder, you thought it was China, it got its root in alchemy. It has its root in alchemy going back to Kemet, of the study of metals in and out the body. Also introduced into Europe by the Moors, as well as your fire stick, which later on was a gun that they didn't have no use for. Introduced by Moors. Music, classical music, that we thought was a white, that's the Moors. Brought that up because the scales was invented in Egypt. It comes out of Hermetic science and ultimately out of alchemy. It is melanin put to scale. Yes. The word muse is a Greek word for components inside of the melanin. These angelic beings called muse. You get the word music. Something that inspires you. Melanin inspires you. This is all coming from the Hermetic teachings or the teachings of Tahuti. Because Hermes is Tahuti in Egypt, which is the teachings of alchemy, which is the study of melanin, the dark night of the soul. And so music, which is the components of what's heard in the body put to scale, It's introduced into Europe by the Moors, classical music. They call Beethoven the Moor of Russia. You see. Some stuff called the Greater Key of Solomon, and some stuff called the Lesser Key of Solomon, which is these magical texts introduced into Europe by the Moors. One of the benefits of Moorish teaching was Nostradamus. His teacher was a Moor. There's a movie came out, Orion Pictures Nostradamus, 1994 is when it came out. And thousands of black people that were still up in Russia up until World War II. Stalin supposed to kill 100 million Russians. How the hell he gonna kill 100 million people? If that's a number, how he gonna kill millions and millions of people, his own citizens, and they gonna turn against him? They was doing ethnic cleansing and was killing leftover black Russians.
And they're doing that even now.
Exactly. What happened was the Khazars, which was a Gnostic Moorish people that settled they settled France, they settled Ireland, and they went on up into Russia and on into Bosnia. And from 1991 to 96, they killed off that black element in Bosnia of the leftover Khazars. The Khazars of these Moors first also settled Ireland. So when they said it, what's his name, ran the snakes out of Ireland, he was running the snake people out of Ireland, St. Patrick's. The Moors. They settled Ireland. The river dance, you see that river dance they doing? The Irish people doing that river dance? That's black. You'll see African tribes will do a dance with their legs are moving and their bodies standing straight, their torso straight. It's the same as the river dance. They found a cross a Celtic cross. So they talk about, you hear these white people talking about, see, if you go to the esoteric stores, you hear Celtic, wheels of Celtic. Celtic is another damn name for Moors. That's just after the Moors trained these people, they became the Celtics. These were the early people who benefited from Moorish civilization. You see what I'm saying? So Celtic. St. Patrick's Day was put in and was also upheld by the Moors in the Irish Catholicism to cover up the fact of the Moors that was there at that time. You see. In Scotland, your bagpipes and those robes they wore, you know, your little kilt, what you call it? What's that called, a kilt? Kilt, that ain't nothing but the Egyptian robe, redone in the fabric of the land. The bagpipes and all of that. Celtic cross with the name on it, Bismillah, which means Allah. All of this brought up by the Moors. The King Arthur in your round table story, which first introduced into Spain. Also, the Moors also instituted your King Arthur in your round table. This all came out of Ireland. Then when Britain took over Ireland, the Camelot became Britain. But before, when it was in Ireland, it was supposed to be a new city at the ends of the earth. We'll get into that, which is supposed to be America. It only became Britain after. Get your movie Excalibur to try to get Excalibur, 1981, to try to get a synopsis on the King Arthur's court and the Holy Grail thing. Get the movie Excalibur, 1981, to try to learn about what the King Arthur's court is. Your Grail is supposed to be this mystical cup that's supposed to bring magical healing as well as a form of the Christ energy. All of that stuff introduced into Europe by the Moors, mainly into Ireland by the Moors. So the Irish, the original Irish, which was a lot of black people, was also settled there by the Moors. You can get the movie Secrets of Rowan Ish. Secrets of Rowan Ish, and when they talk about the Black Seal, that's the Moors. That's the Moors also. They'll talk about a Black Seal. That's also the Moors. The Hermetic text that I talked about was introduced into the, which is called the Corpus Hermeticus, which is basically the basis of European knowledge, which they sifted the Corpus Hermeticus to give you the byproducts of some other greater mysteries, is introduced by the Moors. Your Nookian magic, you'll see, it's supposed to be this magic. It was supposed to be booked up by a guy by the name of John Dees, which is supposed to be Queen Elizabeth, a soothsayer, a magician. And he's supposed to have gotten contacted by these Enochian entities and gave him this system of magic where in actuality he had full run of the British Museum, which became one of the main custodians of all this leftover stuff from the Moors. And by him having full reign, he just went in there and just translated text. Anytime you see some stuff in these metaphysical bookstores where they have these old ancient texts, like the Greater Key of Solomon, and they'll say, well, these texts just mysteriously showed up in Europe, that means that they were from the Moors. There's some stuff called The Magic of Abramelin, a book called The Magic of Abramelin. You ever get into that little book on the magic of Abramelin, you will find all of the stuff that's in that book is Moorish science, numerology, astrology, astronomy, your Kabbalah, your Kabbalistic text, which is Jewish mysticism. The first books of the Kabbalah is the Zohar, Sefer Yetzirah, Sefer Beher. These particular books came out of Moorish Spain. The first book came out of Spain. But how did it get in Spain? They talk about the Spanish Jews. Good book on this Moorish science and stuff, a book called People of the Secret by Ernest Scott. In that book he'll talk about the Sufis. He won't say the Moors, but he'll also say the Sufis in Spain. He's a master of the English language. You will see it up in there. But he also goes in the book and says Sufi, Suf means woolly-haired one. But Camelot, the word Camelot, comes from the word Tam, Egypt, Lot. It means the new state of Egypt, which would also be America. Find out about America being broken down and being the new state of Kemet, Washington, D.C., and all the other cities in America bear witness to that on the Masonic architecture. Mary P. Hall wrote a book, Secret Destiny of America. A new book called Return of the Ancient Serpent of Wisdom, which is literally the Kundalini energy, but at the end of the book he talks about the new destiny where this ancient serpent of wisdom is supposed to end up in America, which is talking about black people. The Book of Enoch, the Ethiopian Book of Enoch, brought to Europe by the Moors, which predates the Old Testament and was not put in the Old Testament because it's coming from Ethiopia. The Slavic Book of Enoch. How did Slavs get a Book of Enoch? Because all that's Moorish science. Turkey was a Moorish providence. Then all of a sudden Turkey get hit with a damn earthquake. But then again, we all know that based on the Hawks Project, and the white boy got the actual, the type of science to create earthquakes, hurricanes and storms, tornadoes and all that. Your Jews, the white Jews, introduced in the Moors or converted into Judaism by the Moors, given the Torah and given the other higher text, which is your Kabbalah. All that's Moorish science. The Kabbalah comes from the temple of Komongo in Egypt, where they got the Pharaoh holding up the same tree of life that the Jews said is supposed to be Jewish mysticism. On the temple wall, they got them holding up that same tree of life, the temple of Komongo in Egypt. Also, too. The plan of the Moors was to civilize a semi-barbaric people, is halfway civilized, so we can be the benefit of this particular information once we come and get set up in America, which is also prophesied in the Greek story, Jason and the Argonauts, which this story, the guy, Apollonius, was the curator or the director of the library at Alexandria. Then all of a sudden this story, Jason of the Argonauts, when he takes the best of the Africans, put them in a boat to sail to the ends of the earth and a land called Caucasus to get the golden fleece, which is the lamb's wool in Christ with the lamb's wool, a woolen fleece. It's called the woolen fleece or the golden fleece, and when you translate all that, it means melon, and it also means the Christ. So shall the sun, as the sun rises in the east, so shall the Son of Man rise in the west, which is the Christ. The Son of Man is the Son in man. The hidden Son, or the black Son, which is the manifestation or the crystallization of melanin in a people in the West. The Hermetic text, which is the prophetic text, that is assigned to Asclepius. And Asclepius, as you know, is the Asclepius is the God and the physician Imhotep. And Imhotep, as you know, is Asclepius. In the Hermetic text, they got a whole sermon, the perfect sermon of Asclepius. And in there is the prophecy of how we were going to go into slavery. How Egypt, which is the temple of all the gods, will become one big graveyard. And how the pious man, which is righteous man, would be looked on as impious. And how the impious man, which is the wicked man, will be considered pious, righteous. And how the weak man will be considered strong, and the strong man will be considered weak. And how everybody would look up to the wicked man will be considered noble. And how the righteous and pious man will be treated like a common criminal. And all these people in this faraway land will look like Egyptians. They will have the mind of another race. Now that's all in the prophet. Imhotep starts crying. He said, well, we ever hear about it. And so who is the person that Imhotep is divining to, giving him this spiritual knowledge, say, yeah, Maya will be established. He said, where? He said, there will be a land that's not established yet, that all nations will feed towards in all types of transportation to get there. And in that land, there will be an extremity or an appendix or an annex of Egyptians that will be in that land. And they will establish Maya.
Now, Bobby, just for clarification, the text that this prophecy in
yes. I give you three versions of it. One, same perfect sermon of Asclepius and Walter Scott's book, Hermetica. The other book, which might be hard to get, because it's by Shambhala Press, but you still probably can get it 1992, it came out again, from the 1930s. The other one, new book, is by Copenhagen, another Hermetica, which has the perfect sermon of Asclepius in it, which you can get. The other book is 3 volumes, Thrice Great Hermes, 1907 by G.R.S. Mead, which has the perfect sermon in it. Another book, which might be out of print, no, you can get it from Kessinger's Press now. So it's in print. The Kessinger out of print book company, you can get it. Another one is Anna Kingsford and Maitland's book, The Virgin of the World. It's also in there. But the one that you can more readily get is the Nag Hammadi Library, which was dug up in 1945, because the origin of the Corpus Hermeticus is in the back of the book, and that perfect summary of Astrolithius is in the back of the Nag Hammadi Library, translated by James Robinson.
Now, the original text was an Egyptian text that came, the original.
The original one, we don't have the hieroglyphic version because, the Library of Alexandria was burnt.
Okay.
But we do have the translated version in the Greek and Latin that was translated out of the Library of Alexandria. That's the text I'm telling you about. The Hermetic text.
All right.
So there's more than enough stuff. The ones that you can get right off hand, you might have to order the Copenhagen book, which is the Hermetic text, which is probably the latest retranslation of the modern stuff. But also you can get the Nag Hammadi Library, which is all the original sayings of Jesus, or the Christ, let's put it that way. That's in, but a part of that Nag Hammadi Library is that same Hermetic text. It's in there. He said, Maya will be established. But if you go back and get, I told you there was a guy by the name of Theodore P. Ford, wrote a book called God Wills the Negro. And he explained how when the Arabs, the last invasion of Egypt, of Kemet, when the Arabs invaded, a lot of your Egyptians went to West Africa. And when they went to West Africa, when the slave trade started years later, the first people that the African kings gave up were the Egyptians, who were homeless. Living in West Africa, their empire was destroyed or taken over by the Arabs. So two versions of this. Number one, they gave them up because if you are an African king, you got to look out for your own people. So therefore, you give up the scrubs, the homeless, because you are obligated to look out for your own people. The other version is that these people came and they were very advanced in their culture, their dress, very sophisticated, and at this particular time, some of the Africans had deteriorated and they were jealous of the Egyptians. So when the slave trade came, they went looking for the Egyptians and gave them up to the doggone slave trade. This book was put out in 1939, God Wills the Negro, and by it being accurate, well, how do you tell things are accurate? You can tell by the actions of the government. The United States government came in after 2 years and confiscated all the books. Got rid of it.
Can anybody get a copy of it?
Fortunately, a few people in Chicago ended up with a few copies of the book. And as a result, this spring I received a copy of the book, and the copy, the photocopy, was in perfect preserved condition, just like the original book. And that it proves that the original people who came to the West as slaves were these Egyptians. Because part of the Negroes that the white boy got to counter the Afrocentric movement was saying, why do you all call yourselves Egyptians? You all were West Africans. But now this is the proof that part of the great deal of the people that the Africans was giving up, they gave up the Canaanites. Which also proves why there's a stela of Akhenaten found in Oklahoma in the 1800s. Before they even knew, whenever they found this stela, they didn't even know Akhenaten existed. But they found it in Oklahoma. That's documented in Ice, the Ultimate Disaster by Richard Noon in his book. So they found this stela of hieroglyphics of Akhenaten hymns in 1800s in Oklahoma. As well as they found a group of Egyptians, Native Americans speaking, Egyptians speaking and writing ancient Kemetic language over here in Maine. All documented in Richard Noon's book, Ice, the Ultimate Disaster, 5/5/2000, which is reprinted. And he happens to be a Mason. giving us some of this particular information. But the Rosicrucians said that the capstone of the Great Pyramid is the granite that is made of the capstone of the Great Pyramid can only be found one place on the earth, Stone Mountain, Georgia. Which means that Confederate picture that you see on Stone Mountain, Georgia, if anybody ever saw the picture of Stone Mountain, Georgia, where they got Raleigh Lee and all these Confederate things, that's not by accident. Because that particular mountain is an ancient relic that coincides with the pyramid, as well as pyramids of Giza, as well as your Rosicrucians also said that the white man was an experiment that went bad by the black man. The Rosicrucians said that. The Rosicrucians, because a lot of your Yahoo theory documents of the creation of the white man was taken up into Europe by the Moors. And the Rosicrucians were the ones that became the custodians of those particular documents. Rudolf Steiner, who was Adolf Hitler's teacher, who was later on run out of Germany by Adolf Hitler. And years later, all his manuscripts and stuff that he had made broke the heart of this stuff. And they later on had to go and get all of this particular information, and they got it by a series of lectures that he put on, and they got all these particular books. But there's about 20-something books, the one book that you can't find, you got to get some self research, is the one on Atlantis and Lemuria, where he talks about this God took a germ and created a new race of people. Just like Elijah Muhammad said in his theology of time, that they took a germ and created a new race of people. Elijah Muhammad said in the message to the black man that the moon was separated from the earth. And so Rudolf Steiner in his book Atlantis and Lemuria. Rudolf Steiner's book Atlantis and Lemuria talking about the creation of the white boy. He was contemporary with H.G. Wells. So H.G. Wells wrote the novel part of this story, and after you get your Island of Dr. Moreau part, which is now represented in a movie in 1996, starring the master of their actors, Marlon Brando playing Yahoo. But also Yahoo Kirk was also a Hyksos god, translated in Donald B. Redwood's book, Egypt, Canaan, and Israel, and also in a book called Bright, the guy last name is Bright, the history of Israel. The history of Israel. So the Rosicrucians is the ones that became a custodian of a lot of the Moorish documents also. The Moors set up Europe as a result to fulfill prophecy. Slavery, although how hideous it was, is prophecy being fulfilled. Give you two examples. The Jason and the Argonauts, the story, is also about
Makeda, the Queen of Sheba. This is no myth. We have found stories about her in the Kebra Negast. It's been translated now, and we could see what actually happened. As it was represented in some of the Jewish chronicles, it appears as though this woman was just a beautiful black woman, and she came to Solomon's court, and Solomon got very obsessed with her and built this fantastic palace and then gave her a son, and she went back to Ethiopia. It was not as simple as that. It was not confined to romantic concerns. The reason why Solomon was paying such tremendous respect to the Queen of Sheba is because the Queen of Sheba had a larger empire than Solomon. One of her merchants, Tamarin, alone, had more than 300 camels and more than 500 ships. One merchant. She controlled a part of Ethiopia, a part of Egypt, a part of Persia, vast domains. And she was involved in a very important trade. A very important trade links had been established by her. She therefore went to Solomon as an equal. Solomon built a palace, or at least a room within his palace, where the walls were made of fine crystal from the floor to the ceiling, and treated her with enormous respect because it wasn't just romantic, it involved trade links and connections. Trade links and connections. When she came back to Ethiopia, she bore a son for Solomon, Menelik I. That is the longest line in the world. There is no line, by the way, there is no line in the history of monarchies in the world that is as long as the Ethiopian. It dates from the romance between the Queen of Sheba and Solomon and goes all the way down to Haile Selassie with just a break of about 300 years. We find, however, that the Ethiopians who had moved up into Egypt, even though the woman was more important, or certain aspects of the woman was more important than the man, when that movement went up into Egypt, you find the male priests trying to seize power from the woman. So they built a concept of the sovereign, the pharaoh, as something that could only be a male, because there were certain things that they associated symbolically with the pharaoh. So even though women became powers behind the throne, it is only when they came to the end of a dynasty they allowed a woman to reign. And then came extraordinary women who reigned anyway. Hatshepsut was one such woman. She refused to accept that the male heir should reign. She said, no, no, no. And they said, but you are not male, you cannot be the true pharaoh. And she says, yes, I'm male, and she stuck a beard on her chin. And she said, I dare you, do not call me she, call me he, I'm in charge. And she said, I came as Horus, darting fire among my enemies. And everybody was afraid of her. For half a century, no one on earth, male or female, wielded such incredible power. And the thing about her, and it's very important to note because it seems to run through the history of great women, is that they were not just power hungry. She had to assert her power, and she had to blend and merge both male and female, what had become to be accepted as male and female attributes, in order to assume the full pharaonic powers.